Welcome to the Sound on Sound People and Music Industry podcast channel with me, Kevin Paul. Today we feature one of our legacy episodes with award-winning producer and engineer Catherine Marks. Catherine talks to me about her early beginnings and what it's like to work with Alan Moulder and Flood, and how she encourages the artists that she works with to perform at their highest level. Catherine, thanks for taking the time to talk to me.
My pleasure.
Let's start at the beginning. How did you start working here?
I'd be interested to know what Flood said, but I started in 2005, just down the hall, and essentially assisting his assistant, Andy Savers. But yes, I met Flood in 2001, and then finally, after I'd finished my degree in architecture in Australia, he gave me the opportunity to come and try working for him over here.
If you were an architect or training to be an architect, what made you want to come into the studio?
I think I had played the piano growing up, and I'd always loved music and writing music, and I had wanted somehow a career in music, but I didn't know what kind of career. And at school, they don't exactly encourage that unless you're going to be a classical pianist or a performer. Or after having met Flood in 2001, he had suggested that I kind of went back to Australia, I should join bands and write music for other people to kind of explore what area it was that I was interested in, basically, because I didn't know what it meant to be a producer. I didn't know what it meant to work in a studio. And there were just sort of little things that kind of kept piquing my interest. Like I was in a band and we got a grant to record an album, and I learned about reverb, and I thought that was like the most amazing thing, and all the different kinds of reverbs. And I went and Googled it, and I was asking the engineer lots of questions. I mean, but again, like I wasn't aware that it was something that I was interested in. I think Flood was just providing another opportunity for me to explore another side of working in the music industry, and I didn't know that I'd enjoy it or be any good at it. It was just, let's see. And
nearly 15 years later,
you're
still in the music industry.
Turns out I really liked it, and it wasn't that bad at it.
No, obviously we'll talk about that a little bit later. So did you come from Australia all the way here to work with Flood?
Yes.
Okay, so you've flown halfway around the world, turned up at his door.
Basically,
and basically he's given you an obvious opportunity.
Yes.
Did you have any expectation of what it's like to work in the studio?
Well, being completely naive, I thought I'm going to be, I'm flying to England to produce records.
Okay.
Like straight away. I didn't, no one had...
Well, that's a great expectation.
Well, yes, but no one had really explained to me the sort of steps that are required, the kind of hierarchy.
Yeah.
The
structure.
Yeah, the structure, the time that it takes and the roles that exist, and that I was going to be starting at the bottom in order to learn and gain experience. I just thought it was about, someone sat at the room and was like, that needs more reverb. Or, I don't know. I didn't know.
Okay.
Again, this is 15 years ago.
Yeah. I think that's an expectation for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Though. I mean, maybe not now.
Yeah.
The internet provides all of that information for you.
True.
But obviously even 15 years ago.
Yeah.
People did have an expectation possibly that the studio was just a place you turned up and things happened.
Well, having a good idea was all you needed.
Yeah.
But it's so much more than having a good idea.
Yeah, a good idea is the first thing in the process,
yes.
Isn't it? What's it like working with Flood?
It was challenging.
That's not exclusive to Flood, though.
No, that's not exclusive to Flood.
The studio environment can be challenging.
Yeah, the first few years were very challenging. It had a lot to do with my naivety about, again, what the dynamic of the studio and how to be, and I had no technological kind of understanding or previous knowledge.
So literally you came in cold?
Knew nothing. I mean, even when I played in bands, the other guys in the band like plugged my keyboard into my amp because I didn't know the difference between input and output. I mean, I was that.
I think some of the most successful musicians still operate it on that basis.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, I do.
I've worked with plenty of them.
When I first started, there was definitely a particular ethos and expectation and standard of how to behave as an assistant in the studio, and that was not expressed necessarily to me. I sort of had to pick it up. So it was a struggle. However, throughout, as I sort of began to understand that, and as we worked together more and more, I mean, he's an incredible creative and a maverick in the studio, and he's. I mean, he taught me kind of loads of things. One of the things that I even say to bands is I remember we were recording Polly Harvey, and there was a 19A19 mic, a Lomo mic, and he was sitting at the desk and she was sitting behind him, and he just sort of turned the mic stand in the vicinity of her guitar and hit record. It wasn't, he didn't spend like hours placing the mic. It was just, it's
on the fly, as it were.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so kind of always being in record and always capturing something, and also just in the way that he would record things. I mean, I kind of learnt back to front. Like I learnt not, how there's all these rules about recording. I learnt without rules.
Yeah.
And then later on I sort of understood like.
You learnt the technicals.
Yes.
Yeah.
There was things that he would do, like place a mic in a cupboard, and it would sound amazing. There were lots of.
I mean, I have had the pleasure of working with Flood many, many years ago on a PJ Harvey record actually, and for the week that I was assisting him, it was the most enlightening time.
Yeah.
In terms of production, so and obviously.
I know, he makes incredible records. But he did me so many favours even though I thought I was being constantly punished. But he'd always be throwing me in the deep end without any explanation or any sort of brief. It just would be kind of...
Can you give an example of something like that?
I mean, I guess...
You mean the deep end as in, you're going to record something now?
I mean, it was more putting me in situations that I'd gain a lot of experience and necessary experience without having had any previous experience, and kind of bluffing my way through it until I finally got it, I guess. I mean, I remember one of the examples is after we'd done the Polly record, which... White Chalk, which I think we'd spent a good 6 months on, but we were recording to tape, and obviously, it was myself, John Parrish, and Flood.
Yeah.
And while I was tape op, essentially, I always had the backup of Flood, and then Ed Harcourt was doing a record or producing a record, and their engineer had pulled out, so Flood had recommended me, and I'm like, God, I've never properly engineered and recorded onto tape all by myself, and he was just like, just do it, and because he seemed to have faith in me, or at least projected faith to Ed, then Ed seemed to trust me, and then that sort of gave me confidence to be able to do that, and we managed to do that, and it's still actually one of my favourite sounding records that I've ever done.
There's a thing here at the Assault and Battery Studios, and I discussed this with both Alan and Flood, about the ethos and the career path that people that start working here have to go through.
Yeah,
for me, that's really important in terms of, because the old school studio doesn't exist anymore. No, people aren't doing that at other studios.
Well, the old school studio, in my understanding, is the way that Flood and Alan were kind of brought up in the industry.
Yes.
Like when they worked at Trident, and there was like a whole team of assistants who were kind of vying for particular opportunities, and the kind of it was survival of the fittest, essentially. Which, although it's not as cutthroat now, and the people who do come through the doors, they're sort of nurtured a bit more, and we help cultivate their careers. There is still an element of like, you've got to you've kind of got to pay your dues, and there is an attitude that you need to have and a trust that you need to earn in order for you to kind of progress to the next level.
Yeah.
And instilling those kind of, I guess, work ethic and that work ethic and is something that I learnt when I was coming through as well.
Yeah.
And you're right, there isn't that kind of studio culture that exists
that's right.
as much anymore.
That's right. There isn't, is there? And that's one of the things that for me is incredibly important here.
Yeah.
And I think people need to hear about, because without that ethos, our creative art, if you like, just gets washed away. And colleges and universities provide a very particular role in the development of the next generation of producers and engineers and mixers. But it can't provide the type of experience that you would have working in a place like Assault and Battery.
No, there's a type of experience that I've gained, and look, there's lots of different kinds of producers and different kinds of career paths, and this is just one. But having had this experience, it's meant that I kind of have the tools to deal with kind of high pressure and high profile situations now.
Yeah.
Where, I mean, I remember being 3 years in thinking, having been assisting and doing a bit of engineering, thinking, well, why aren't I producing records now? And I remember Flood saying, it's going to take you at least 10 years. And I was like, what? 10 years? I didn't know this. I wanted to be the biggest producer in the world, like that. But he was right. It kind of took the time that it took. And there were a lot of lessons and a lot of mistakes that I made along the way, but that was part of the experience. And, when I did start to get high profile jobs and work and production work with major labels, and it was still early on in my career, I really felt the pressure and the sense of responsibility in dealing with bigger budgets, and I still then didn't have the kind of mechanisms to cope with that kind of pressure. And now, as the years have gone on, I definitely, kind of throw anything at me and
bounces off.
It just bounces off. I call it the impenetrable force field. So just, any sort of artist issues or, just management, record labels, anyone who's sort of got any issues, I feel like I can deal with those.
And do you think Flood and Alan have taught you how to approach that?
I think just through years of working with them, I've learned from following the way that they
approach dealing with people.
Yes. Yeah. And just how, that and their kind of level of confidence and skill. The technical side is a part of it, but it's not at all the essential part of it.
What do you think is the essential part?
I think it's the psychology and the sort of people management, and then and being able to facilitate and create situations that are conducive to creativity and expanding that creativity so that creativity transcends to something extremely special. It isn't just about recording something and making it sound good. It's about kind of elevating the performances and capturing something. And that is almost an intangible thing, knowing how to like twiddle some knobs and getting a good sound. I love like how tactile that is, and I love the sonics is definitely a massive part of it in allowing whatever that energy or feeling is to come through the speakers. So I don't know, it's like a whole kind of series of interweaving parts and experience that through having worked with Alan and Flood and having them as my mentors, which I was very fortunate to.
Sure, for sure.
That it's kind of definitely taught me and influenced me heavily.
How does Catherine create that atmosphere in the studio for your artists to work?
Well, it's about sort of building trust and empowering the artists, I think, rather than me dictating how something is going to go. I'm reacting to the energy or the dynamic in the studio, and also trying to make it enjoyable and fun.
Yeah.
And the studio can be quite an intense and tense environment.
Yes.
So often trying to ease that and that tension and making the artist feel as comfortable as possible. Comfortable in the sense that they feel comfortable enough to be themselves, whether they're going to be arseholes or miserable or just whatever they need to express. So I try and get that quite quickly, I guess, and achieve that. And I usually do that in pre-production.
I guess then you have to have a very good intuition.
Yes.
About people.
Well, I think I've learnt, and again, that's through working with Flood and Alan, but learning to read people and read their kind of needs. As an assistant, you have to do that. You have to to be thinking sort of 3 steps ahead.
Yeah.
I just had this wonderful assistant in America who I'd call his name and he'd already be standing right next to me.
Yeah.
I thought he was out of the room, but he kind of knew when I needed something, or I'd say, would you mind? And he'd go, already done it. Before I'd even finished the sentence, he knew exactly what I needed. And we'd only been working together for a few days. So that was, I was like, that was a godsend.
Well, that's always helpful, isn't it?
Yes.
That's always helpful.
Yeah. But I was thinking he's going to be a good producer because he made me feel very comfortable.
You worked with Flood all those years.
3 years, yep.
And then, amazingly, they said, okay, we'll go downstairs and work with Alan Moulder.
I know. Well, I think Alan, he had thought perhaps that I hadn't had I'd had a kind of erratic education from a technical point of view. So he felt a responsibility. But I'd also, coming into work for him, I'd also had a lot of experience engineering and working for other producers. So I felt well equipped to kind of deal with someone of that caliber.
Were you engineering by then? Or
I
were you
think
still just assisting stroke engineering?
Assisting stroke engineering. I think I did like vocal and production and engineering on pop stuff.
Okay.
I think that's what I was kind of doing at that point. So by the time I got to Al, I kind of walked in and I said, look, these are the things that I'm good at. Use me for those, but here is the stuff that I'm really lacking knowledge in, but you only need to tell me once. And he was great. He really kind of took the time to explain a lot of things to me. And if I ever made mistakes, he would just tell me once. And
when you say a mistake, what do you mean?
Just simple things like the patch bay. That sometimes that was something that I wasn't, even though I'd been working at Assault and Battery 2 for a year.
Yeah.
There was still things that I would get confused about. And I'd sort of probably not patch something in right, and he would just
talk you through it.
Talk me through it, yeah. But then there were other, I guess we created kind of systems which allowed him to take the time, because when you're mixing, you obviously, there's not a lot of time. You might have a day and a half or 2 days. You're lucky. So there isn't a lot of time to explain stuff to people who are there to kind of essentially support you, but he did take that time, and I'm very appreciative.
Were you very inquisitive then? Were you always like?
I was initially, but obviously working with Alan, I wasn't. I mean, it was more just I had a job to do. So here are the tools that I needed to be the support for him. If there were things that I didn't know, he would just let me know. And
yeah, because the mixing assistant is quite different to the recording assistant.
Yes.
Recording, you're always moving around, you're checking stuff. Mixing, you're kind of on standby.
Yes, exactly. I was more.
What did you end up doing with? Can you talk me maybe through? Okay, so first of all, you probably just maybe sat at the back of the studio, kind of just watching. But then eventually, you moved forward.
Yeah, so I think it wasn't very long until I would start preparing mixes for him, and also doing stems as well. Like he'd always done his own stems. And I think one Friday night I said, "Why don't you go home early and I'll do the stems? Why don't you do that?" And I think because our working relationship had kind of been cemented quite quickly in in that there was it was quite fluid, and we were becoming a good team.
Yeah,
I think he trusted me to do that. Now I know it sounds like not a big deal, but for him it was, because in all his career he'd always done his own stems. We both loved systems and file management and color coding and spreadsheets and, just kind of anything that could make it foolproof and idiot proof.
Yeah.
Like checking recall sheets and double checking. And I mean, I really cared about what I was doing. So yeah, there was I guess there was a level of trust there. So after that, I would start preparing mixes. So, for example, sessions would come in and I'd kind of arrange the Pro Tools sessions and add plugins that he would normally use, or start balancing it to match a rough mix.
And you did that all off your own back? You were just like, okay.
Well, I was more just, I can do that, let me do this, or let me try this for you. And then that was the system that kind of became apparent. And then a little while in, I think about 6 months or 9 months in, he was starting to get mix work for perhaps lower budget projects. And so he would say, well, while I'm working on something else, why don't you do this? And I'll kind of oversee it. So essentially I was doing mixes and getting my homework marked. But what was so great about working with Alan was, obviously having worked with Flood and a load of other producers, I'd never been part of the process of finishing off a record, essentially.
Yeah.
So in my head, I was like, well, you can kind of do whatever and record whatever, and someone else is going to fix it down the line.
Yeah.
But experiencing working for Alan and through the mixing process, I started to understand and love finishing off a project or finishing off a track. And I think that helped me inadvertently to become a better producer, because I knew how I wanted to sound later down the line. Yeah. So I would record things how I wanted them to sound in the mix, not thinking we can process.
Oh, I'll leave it to so-and-so to sort out.
Yeah.
And therefore, you take that maybe a little bit more time or care or have a bit more thought about it.
Well, exactly. And also it's also being considerate, because I knew of the kind of, sometimes the quality of the recordings that we were getting and how frustrating it was, because you're trying to get something out of it that just doesn't exist.
Nowadays, people are recording anywhere with anything.
Yeah.
What do you do when you've got a sound or a guitar sound or a drum sound that isn't very helpful? How do you approach?
I embrace and try and disguise it. Whereas Alan probably wouldn't. He would be quite fastidious, and he would work very hard to try and get it to where he would want it.
You
well, because also that in itself, and I feel like this is something that Flood, probably unbeknownst to him, kind of taught me, that I mean, things don't have to be perfect, and the way something is recorded. So whether it's like, a drum is kit is recorded with a 57.
Yeah.
That's the thing that's kind of makes whatever the feeling of the track kind of unique. Okay. So rather than going, I wish I had a kick and a snare, separate mic or something to create more punch, you find something else about the track that, gives you that thing in replacement
to create the magic.
Yes, exactly.
All right, so you're mixing with Alan, and you started doing the other projects.
Yeah.
Do you have a sound? Do you have a vibe? Do you have like an approach? Like if I employ Catherine Marks to mix my record tomorrow, what am I going to get?
Well, hopefully, just an enhancement of what you've already done. So I love the way Alan mixes, because he doesn't try and reinvent the wheel. He kind of gives you back something that, in the way that you always wanted it to sound, only better, and you're not sure why. And I hope that I do that, but also I hope that I kind of enhance the energy and the emotion and the feeling through the mix.
Well, you definitely do that. I mean, your records with the Wombats and the Amazons, they just sound amazing.
Thank you.
The volume,
and
the power is for me anyway. I mean, I was listening to them over the weekend.
Yeah,
I was thinking, wow, how'd you get that? Where's that coming from? Because all engineers, when they're mixing, are seeking the nirvana
Yeah.
and this utopian ideal. But we obviously all struggle with that.
Yeah. It's more about feeling
Right.
for me, not getting, rather than thinking, oh, how's that bass sitting?
Right.
Or, is the EQ of the guitar right? I'm like, how do all the pieces feel together?
Okay. And is that something you got from both Flood and Alan, or is that something that you've kind of just thought, no, this is your intuition there?
Well, Flood and Alan never sat down and said, well, this is my process.
Right.
So whether it is something that I inadvertently picked up from them, I don't know. But if I am actually quite conscious of the fact that I don't kind of start a mix by listening to a whole bunch of things in solo and tweaking that particular sound. I mean, eventually, I want to hear things in solo, but I like to kind of massage the whole mix together first with all the elements in there. And
you're just getting a balance?
Well, just to get a sort of vibe or something, something that kind of speaks to me. And I'm sort of also very visual. And so especially in producing and recording, I kind of like the sonics of something to have an imagery to it.
In your mind?
In my mind,
okay,
yeah.
So you're creating a picture of the band,
yes,
or the record.
Yes, some sort of imagery attached to, or something filmic, or one of the last Manchester Orchestra record I did. I kept thinking about the TV series Twin Peaks, which can be quite bleak and dark, or David Lynchy style kind of imagery. And I would, whether it's apparent or not, it's definitely something that is a starting point for me.
Oh, yeah.
And it's that kind of, I don't know, almost like a sound that you can put your hand into the speakers and pluck it out, because it's, I don't know, it says something that evokes an image or a feeling. All those sort of things really excite me, I guess.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
To me, it's very esoteric, but
yeah,
it makes perfect sense. Really.
So with Al, I did that. I think we did that for a couple of years, and we were also training someone else for him to kind of take over from me. But I was essentially working in a little B room next to Flood's kind of Alan's main control room.
Yeah.
And eventually he was like, it's time for you to leave, which was quite devastating. But also because I wasn't really doing anything for him anymore. I was just using the room and getting my own kind of mixed projects.
Yeah.
But I loved working next door to him, because also I loved referring to him, and almost I was mixing stuff with him in mind, imagining if he was going to come in and mark my homework again. And that happened a few years after that as well, after I'd left that room and I moved to where we are now. And there was a point where I think I just ran into him and I said, do you mind if I mix without you in mind anymore? And he's like, I've been waiting for you to say that for ages.
Oh.
But that was kind of great, because it took the shackles off, and I started using plugins in different ways, or processing things in just kind of trying out my own thing, not necessarily doing the things that I thought were correct, but that felt correct.
Do you mix entirely in the box?
I mix in the box, but I run through a summing mixer, analog summing mixer.
What one have you got there? The Fat Bastard?
Fat Bastard, yeah.
Yeah, I like that one.
An Obsidian compressor, domestic audio Obsidian compressor.
That's the same. Is that the same one?
As Alan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that seems really popular.
Yeah, it's popular in this building. I got it because of him. I like blue lights.
Okay. If it was red, you wouldn't be...
No, not as interested.
Okay.
And then through, I think the VAC rack.
The VAC rack is
an EQ.
Okay, and then you're going into the manly...
Massive passive EQ.
And then straight back in. So you're kind of analog front end.
Yes.
But Primarily mixing in the box.
Primarily mixing in the box. All my effects, like a lot of my effects, like delays and reverbs, I process outside the box and print back in.
Okay, so do you use a lot of pedals
Yes.
for reverbs?
Yeah, just
Delays?
just interesting things that kind of add another.
That you can't get from a PCM 70.
Yeah, just that add in a different dimension. I find it, yeah, it's more kind of 3-dimensional.
Okay.
I love the kind of color and the sound of the Fat Bastard. I can really hear when something has been mixed in the box, actually, but only because I'm sort of so attached to kind of that's the sound of that box.
Yeah.
The Fat Bastard.
How long do you spend on the mix? Are you done like in 6 hours?
I could be done. Yeah, sometimes I could be done in 6 hours, and then I'll spend like another day tweaking stuff that no one else is going to notice. But I usually I kind of get the vibe of the mix within 4 to 6 hours.
Yeah.
And if it's not coming, then I have to park it. But that's very rare.
Do you use a lot of automation?
Yeah.
In pushing stuff?
Yeah.
Into the Bastard or?
Well, I also drive the 192 interface quite hard as well.
Are you in the red?
Sometimes, yeah.
Okay, that's all right.
I quite like
that. I like that. I like the sound of
that. Yeah. But yeah, like I'll balance everything, I guess, quite statically, and then I'll start to do rides for, kind of to enhance particular moments or for things to kind of fall away and then come back again. That's what I'll do. Or I'll use different plugins for different moments in a song so I'll automate those, yeah.
When you started a mix, have you got an idea of what it is you want it to be at the end? Does that go back to the picture thing? Like, do you have like an image of, you sit down, you listen to the rough mix?
If it's something that I've produced, then I already know how I want it to sound.
Sure.
It's actually harder.
Yeah.
Because you've been hearing the potential the whole way through, and then finally you've got to deliver that potential. So I tend to inch stuff kind of closer and closer to the finished product when it's my own productions. But if it's someone else and I haven't been part of the process, I usually have a conversation with the artist or the producer kind of about what they're looking for. Are they really happy with the rough mix? And if so, it's just enhancing what's already there. But how far, I'll usually send a kind of work in progress and ask, have I pushed this too far or can we, take it a bit further? And I'll kind of gauge it there. But yes, it's sort of, I'll kind of do a lot of things to kind of get myself excited about it. And then I'll listen from top to bottom a few times to kind of see if that feeling still exists. And then I'll send it off knowing in my head like all the kind of little detail stuff that I want to do. And then that's what happens after that. After they're like, yay, we love it. Which then I'm also really surprised about because I'm like, really? You don't have any comments?
I can see you got 2 or 3 speakers here.
Yeah.
Do you listen elsewhere? Are you listening outside like on the car or on iPhone?
I listen on my iPhone and the headphones.
Yeah, you just download it and check the mix out there.
Yeah,
make sure.
I can usually tell like things that are sort of not great to poke out on iPhone speakers, which is really bad. I've got a pair of M Audio speakers at home, which I'll sometimes check stuff on. They're quite clear and unforgiving. But I've been working in this room now since 2012, 13.
7, 8 years.
So I know this room really well. It's so hilarious. Like this was only going to be temporary. I mean, it's essentially a little box, but I kind of love it.
If it works, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. When you're recording, and say you're recording, the Amazon or whatever.
Yeah.
Are you when you're doing your drums and a bass? Are you tempo mapping stuff? Are you going out of your way to quantize stuff, or are you just very much like it's a band, let them play? What's your feelings about that? Because a lot of people,
it's so dependent on the project.
Yeah,
I will go for performance over precision.
Yeah, every day. every time?
Mostly, but also sometimes it also depends on the way that it's being recorded. Like I've just done a project where we're doing it over a long period of time, and we were very decisive at the start that the drum sounds were kind of really important to the identity of the songs, whether they were going to be electronic or live drums. So we've spent a lot of time on that, and in order for so it's less about live. The drums were tracked with a live performance, but essentially we kind of want to have like a really solid foundation.
Yeah.
And a lot of things are about rhythms and counter rhythms. So with that, we've been putting things to the grid, but it isn't just like we whack Beat Detective over. We kind of know what the journey should be, and sometimes we let things speed up or slow down.
Yeah, sure.
So it's not kind of quantized within an inch of its life.
Okay.
But then if I guess with the Amazons we recorded to a click, but I didn't quantize the drums. On the first record we didn't. So it was recorded, but everyone was playing together. So there was the movement and the push and pull existed with everything. So
it's basically just sometimes you do,
yeah,
sometimes you won't,
yeah,
but you'll talk with the band,
yeah,
but you'll always take a performance over quantizing the hell out.
But there is also a way to put things to the grid and it be sensitive and not feel like it has been. And that's a skill in itself.
Sure, yeah.
Had great engineers who know how to do that better than me.
Yeah, no, there's some very good people like that.
Yeah.
Things to avoid in the process of making records or mixing records. Are there some things that maybe that you try to avoid or steer away from?
I don't know. That's a good question. I try and avoid wasting time in the studio.
What would be classed as wasting time?
Sitting around and chatting about nothing. Procrastinating. Sometimes discussions are really important, but, when I like to have things sort of happening all the time.
Yeah.
And to be making the most of the studio while we're there.
During the recording?
During the recording, yeah.
And the mixing?
The mixing, I'm sort of by myself.
You're kind of by yourself and then you send it off and so you kind of just work.
Yeah.
Excellent. I think that's good advice, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. Too many people waste time.
Yeah. I mean, it's sometimes it's totally understandable when you might run out of steam and you just need a little brain break. But I find like that if you keep the momentum going, things, sort of great things come out of that. And even pure exhaustion, just it's a different kind of creativity.
So you drive your band.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think that's a great place to leave it.
Okay, awesome.
Thank you very much, Catherine Marks. Thank you for listening, and be sure to check out the show notes page for this episode, where you'll find further information along with web links and details of all our other episodes. And just before you go, let me point you to the Sound on Sound /podcasts website page, where you can explore what's playing on our other channels. This has been a Mixbus production by me, Kevin Paul, for Sound on Sound.